Can somebody please confirm you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
I only need one person to confirm you can hear me, but thank you. Let's go here. Oops. Okay, let me share my screen here. That's not very good. All right, you should be seeing my screen now. That's our web page. Oh, I've got some emails. Um, Let me warn you on Zoom, it has a lot of features to it, like chat and emoticons. If I'm sharing my screen and somebody sends me a chat message, I cannot see it. In fact, when I first took a class on using Zoom, they suggested that there be two teachers in the room, one to monitor the chat and the emoticons, and the other to give the discussion. Well, guess what? You've only got one teacher, and I'm just going to ignore the chat feature and the emoticons because when I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see them. If you want to send me a text, send me an email. Any questions about that?
No questions.
All right. Um, let's start with the syllabus. I'm only going to talk about the lab portion of the syllabus. We'll talk about the lecture portion of the syllabus in the lecture. And I know that'll be a little bit confusing, but you can actually find the syllabus if you haven't found it already in our web page. It's right there, the second item in the web page. So this is the main page of our class, and you should read that note there. I've got a few notes. One of them I sent out to you by email. I assume that's how you got the a link to the class, but you can also get to the class by getting the Zoom invites here. So you could attend the later lab, for example, and there's no penalty for that. Or you can also get the Zoom meetings by clicking on this tab over here. Coming to the Zoom meetings, you got to close that down. And then I don't think yours will be start, but you can click a button there that'll get you into the class. Any question about any of that?
No questions.
Down. All right. Um, let's go back to the syllabus. All right. I do have an office at Clark, but I'm not going to be using it because I'm teaching online or remote. And I do have an email at Clark, but I actually prefer to use the Canvas email. The reason is that my clark.edu email gets a whole bunch of junk emails, which I'm not interested in. And so I'm only going to check my clark.edu email about twice a week, whereas the Canvas email, I will check it about every other day, at least every other day. So if you want a quick email response, use the Canvas email. And oftentimes I'll be checking it every day. But like on the weekend, for example, I would only check it once every 2 days. So there is our lab section there. This lab section was added because there are so many people on my wait list. And actually, when they um, added this lab section, the wait list gained new people. So It didn't really help in that sense, but you guys probably got in because they created this lab for you guys. And there's the other lab at 6:30, and then there will be a lecture at 5. Oops, that's not right. I have to change that. The credits are for the lecture, but the grade will actually be posted in the lab. That's just the way Clark College works, and so both classes are important. We'll talk about the textbook material and other resources in the lecture, course description, student outcomes you can read on your own, course policies and suggestions I'm going to talk about in the lecture. In fact, all of this I'm going to talk about in the lecture, so I'm not going to talk about it now because you'll get it twice otherwise. Student responsibilities, I'll talk about in the lecture. Same with instructor responsibilities. Late assignments, student conduct, I'll talk about that in the lecture. Student study methods in the lecture. Grading, I'm going to just briefly talk about the grading here. This table shows you where the points will be on the grading. There are some points for the lab. There is one lab assignment for each lab for a total of 10 lab assignments, 5 points each for 50 points total. There's the identification of the unknown project. That's a lab project for 75 points. The infectious disease project at 100 points. That's also a lab project. And then the final will include part of the lab too, 450 points. The total points for this class will be 720. I'm not sure what it is for the lab. They will be graded as a separate class, but then at the end they'll be added together for the 720 points. There will be 20 extra credit points available in this class, or about 20. The grading scale, if you get 92% or above, you get an A. 90% or above, you get an A minus. 88% or above, you get a B plus. 82% or greater, you get a B. And 80% or greater, you get a B minus. Note that this grading scale is slightly different than the grading scale in Canvas. So when you see your letter grade in Canvas, note that we follow a different grading scale. And then there's the rest of the grading scale. We give a C plus and a C. Notice we do not give a C minus in this class, and we don't give D pluses or D minuses. You only get a D. Any question about the grading scale?
No question.
All right. Microscope use, we will use a virtual microscope in the lab. Microscopes, you need to know how to use the microscope and the care of the microscope. We'll discuss that in the lab, talking about the microscopes. So this portion isn't terribly important because you're not going to be able to damage a microscope, but you do need to know how to use a microscope. And we actually have one online for you to use. I'll talk about sports services for students in the lecture, other services, one-stop assistance. Let me briefly mention that there is a tutor this term for microbiology, and you can get that from someplace in here. There it is, tutoring services there. And there's actually two tutoring services, or you could count it 3 if you wish. There's a real tutor that you can go in and visit online, not online, but in class. And they're only there at certain hours. So is the online tutor, only there for certain hours. But there's additional tutoring through etutoringonline.org. Sometimes the tutors are not real strong in microbiology. I don't know about the Clark College tutor this term, but like I said, they do have a tutor for microbiology this term. All right, I'll let you read about the non-discrimination policy, school emergency procedures. Let me briefly mention that we are meeting online, so it's very doubtful that we will not meet, even though the college is closed for snow or some other reason like that. However, if there is a what do you call it, an interruption to the internet service or the Zoom service, we will not meet. But other than that, we should be meeting all the time in the winter, even if the Clark College is closed. Safety information for students and physicians. Let me talk a little bit about that. It's really only important for educational purposes for nurses and dental hygienists, meaning you don't really have to worry about being contaminated with a microorganism because everything in this class, including the labs, will be online. But you do need to know about it for your future work as well as for the class. So it's important to read the complete 4-page version of this document posted online in Canvas called Information for Students and Physicians. Let me see if I can show you where it is. There it is, biosafety information for students and physicians. Microbiology labs are operated at a biosafety level 2, BSL2, where personal protective equipment, lab coats, gloves, goggles, etc. are worn in the lab to protect the students. Now, the goggles are only used when there is a splash hazard, but the gloves and the lab coats must be worn at all times while you're in the microbiology lab. Now, that would be a real in-class lab. Obviously, we are doing it online, so you don't have to do that, but you do need to know how the microbiology lab works at Clark. You will be tested on it, and you just need to know. Mm, So access to the laboratory are restricted to the laboratory director when there are infectious agents present. Students with immune compromised or living with caring with an immune compromised individual or a pregnant student or a student who may become pregnant or you're caring or living with someone caring for infants should consult with their physician to determine the appropriate level of participation in the lab. In the real in-class lab, a student like that, I could give them an unknown bacteria that would be considered to be fairly safe, so there would be very little risk of contamination and then taking it to someone who would not be wanted to be exposed to it. Here's a list of the laboratory species used in this class. There's biosafety level 1 organisms right here, and then biosafety level 2 organisms, which have some risk, medium risk, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Shigella dysentery, Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pyogenes. All of these do cause human infections. These are grown every term, and coming into the microbiology lab, you could be exposed to these. Any questions about any of that? Now, like I said, when you're in the lab in real life, you should monitor yourself and note if you get an infection, and then go see your physician. You don't really need to worry about that because you will not be exposed to any of these organisms. some words of advice and comfort. I'll talk about that in the lecture. But you do need to follow the lab and safety rules when you're in the lab. The lab safety rules are described during the first week of class, which is today and Thursday. Although we are not going to physically meeting in the lab, you do need to learn the lab safety protocols. It's a required component of this course, and many nursing programs, as well as allied health science, report that safety is one of the main skills that they want their students to learn. Safety is of primary importance in this lab. The attitudes and actions of the persons working in the lab determine the level of safety, meaning if you're not safe, not only can microorganisms contaminate the environment of the lab, contaminate yourself, but they can contaminate other students as well. So never take shortcuts when risk of safety and accuracy are given to you. Always follow those rules and instructions. Any question about any of that? All right. You're not going to be allowed to take any personal items to your lab bench. Anything coming into the lab per se has to, if it comes into the lab, before you can take it out, it has to be sterilized, and that would be placed in a bucket of bleach for 15 minutes or placed in the autoclave, which would be like a pressure cooker for 15 minutes before you can take it out of the lab. Now, when you come into the door of the lab, we consider the door and the cabinets or the cubbyhole where you put your coat and your backpack and any personal items. We consider that outside of the lab proper. You then have to walk a few feet to get into the lab proper. Okay, so your lab bench would be the lab proper, and anything coming into the lab proper, before you can take it home, it has to be sterilized. So generally, students do not take things into the lab proper. They put it into their cabinet or their cubbyhole, and that's considered outside the lab. So those things you can bring into the room, we'll call it that way because it's not into the lab yet, and you can then take those home with you. Any question about any of that? All equipment that is required, like papers and pens, will be provided for you, and these items must remain in the lab unless they are sterilized. Like you could ask for your, I guess, lab notebook to be taken home, but it has to be sterilized, in which case you would ask for it like a day before you want, not a day, a class before you want to take it, and then I can give it to the lab people to get it autoclaved, and then it'll be autoclaved by the next lab, and I would then have to set it aside so it doesn't get contaminated, and then you could pick it up and then take it home. Any question about any of that?
No.
All right. Only enrolled microbiology students and the staff are permitted into the lab unless authorized by the instructed. All personal items like book bag, books, purses, cell phones, coats must be stored in the designated cabinets as soon as you enter the lab, and that is actually considered outside the lab. Personal items taken into the lab can never be taken out of the lab unless they are sterilized. How you actually send notes to yourself most of the time is you would write on paper and then you would use a digital photograph that you would take. We have iPads, use the iPads and then email it to yourself. Cell phone usage in the lab is prohibited. If you were to get an incoming call, you would have to take off your gloves, take off your lab coat, go wash your hands, go to your phone in your backpack in the cabinet, take the phone outside the lab, and then answer the phone. And then to come back in, you'd have to put away the phone. Obviously, you hang up the phone before you come into the lab, the room of the lab. Put the phone in your backpack, go wash your hands, go put on your lab coat, and then go put on your gloves. Any question about that procedure for using phones? Now, if there's an emergency, we do have a phone in the lab which you can use with your lab coat on and your gloves on. And it's just a regular, what you call a landline, and you can call out. Obviously, you would not get a phone call to come in on that phone, but you can call out. So any prohibited items taken in the lab will be confiscated for safety reasons and only returned after they have been autoclaved or cleaned and bleached, and that would destroy your phone. So never take in your phone or electronics into the lab. There are some exceptions. You are allowed to take some personal items into the lab if you are wearing them, such as jewelry, watches, and your personal eyeglasses. If you had hearing aids, you could take those in the lab too. You should not touch any of these items while you're in the lab. And hopefully you just remember not to touch your watch or your jewelry or your glasses because you can get them contaminated if you did. Any question about any of that?
No question.
Okay, all cultures you're going to be working with should be considered to be potentially pathogenic. Keep hands, pencils, and other materials out of your mouth, ears, nose, etc. There's no drinking or eating in the lab, no gum chewing or other oral habits. You're given nitrile non-latex gloves that are required to be worn after you come into the lab. And the lab coats are stored in the lab. There are a few students who buy a lab coat in the bookstore, and the very first day they will bring it into the lab, and then they will put it on while they're inside the lab. And then when they're done at the end of the day, they have to hang it up in the lab, and that lab coat will stay in the lab all term long. If you do want the lab coat back, you turn it in at the end of the lab, and I will set it aside for the lab people to autoclave it, and then they will wash it and dry it and then hang it up. And I think it's actually hung up outside the lab room, and then you can come and pick it up before the start of the next term. Any question about any of that? All right, so proper attire is always worn in the microbiology lab, and that is mainly a lab coat. Obviously, you have to have a shirt and pants or dress or something like that, and shoes. All shoes must be closed-toed shoes, worn at the lab at all time. Sandals or women's open-toed shoes or thongs that you wear on your feet cannot be worn into the lab. We want minimum protection in case something is spilled on your feet, and we require closed-toed shoes to be worn at all times. In the summertime, I would tell students that you can wear sandals or something like that on your feet, and then just put those in the cubbyhole, and you have to bring your closed-toed shoes into the lab. Any question about any of that? All right, lab coats are usually borrowed from us in the lab, and they will be reused. Each term, what they'll be done is washed at the end, actually autoclaved at the end of the term, and then washed, and then dried, and then hung up in the lab for students to use if they don't buy their own. And like I said, most students do not. If you do buy your own, you can bring it into the lab, but only the first day of the class, and it must stay in the lab all term long until the Actually, the end of the term, which I mentioned that earlier. Goggles are required to be worn in the microbiology lab anytime you're working with a splash hazard. That would be a liquid culture containing microbes in it, or a splash hazard like you're making a slide with a stain, which would be dangerous if you got it into your eye, such as the gram stains. Failure to wear goggles may lead to a loss of points, and obviously that won't happen because we're going to be doing it online. Cleanliness is a virtue in microbiology, so you must disinfect your own lab bench before you begin any work in the lab. This is an in-class lab. And then after you're done, before you leave the lab, you must clean the lab bush. And of course, I've already mentioned that before you enter the lab proper, you walk in the door, put your bags in the cubby hole, and then you walk to the sink, wash your hands, dry your hands, and then you walk into the lab proper, put on the lab coat, put on the gloves. And if you're working with a splash hazard, you go into the area where we have goggles and put on a goggles. Remember, goggles are only used when you're working with a splash hazard. And so that would be maybe something like 3 times all term long. Any question about that? All right, you should know where fire extinguishers are, fire blanket, eye wash station, first aid materials are located in a real lab. Obviously, we'll be online, so that doesn't need to be used, but you do need to know that we do have this safety equipment in the lab for your use. Accidents should be reported to the instructor. Minor accidents should be cleaned up as follows. Always clean broken glass first. If it's not contaminated, broken glass will be picked up with a brush and or a broom and a dustpan. Never pick it up with your fingers, even if you're wearing glass, because the glass can break the fingers, and put it in the broken glass receptacle. Uh, Spilled strong acids, you don't really work with those in the lab as strong bases, but you would wipe them up quickly. You can neutralize them with sodium bicarbonate. Um, Bacterial cultures, liquid cultures should be cleaned up, or even a solid culture, if you spill the bacteria on the floor, should be covered with lots of paper towels, drenched with the paper towel with a disinfectant. Let it sit for 15 minutes before wiping it up. Be especially careful if there's broken glass in that. Wipe it up with more dry paper towels. Discard of the biohazard in the trash can. Obviously, the broken glass does not go in the biohazard trash can. No glass ever goes in the biohazard trash can. The broken glass would go in the broken glass receptacle. Any question about any of that? All right. If there is something that needs to be cleaned up and there's no bacterial or microbe contamination, you can clean it up with paper towels and then just throw it in the regular trash can. But if there's bacteria in it, you throw it, or microbes in it, you throw it in the biohazard trash can. Any question about that? All right. And then any lab cultures that are in a plastic dish that you're done with can be put in the biohazard trash can. But if it's in glass, it needs to go in where the glass, what do you call that? Recycling goes. Not recycling, but discard bin goes. We do use back-to incinerators in the lab. We don't really use Bunsen burners unless the back-to incinerators aren't working. The Bunsen burners use gas, and you have to light them, and they should be turned off when they're not in use. The back-to incinerators may be kept on for 10 minutes if you're going to be using them later, because they take 5 minutes to warm up. But Once you're done using them, they should be turned off. Mouth pipetting is never allowed in the lab. Never take cultures out of the lab, and supplies can only be brought into the lab when authorized by your instructor. If you have a cut or sore on your hand, you should go through a specific procedure. You come into the room of the lab, go wash your hands, and then you walk into the lab proper, going to the first aid kit and apply a bandage. You then go and get your gloves. Well, let me think about that now. You then would go and put on your lab coat and then put your glove over the band-aid. And then when you leave, you take off your gloves, take off your lab coat, go wash your hands, and you may go to the first aid kit and get a fresh band-aid, and then go to your cubby hole, grab your things, and leave. Any question about any of that? All right, all microbial cultures must be labeled completely with your name, the date, the nature of the specimen, meaning what it is. If it's E. coli, just write E. coli. If it's something like bacteria you grew from exposure to air, just write air exposure. And then you must record the medium used on the culture. It's optional. You can record the temperature that you grow it at, but that's optional. Old specimens must be discarded properly in the following ways. Agar plates, we always use uh, plastic plates, are discarded in the biohazard container. Glass slides and cotton swabs are put in a glass container containing disinfectant, and we have one for glass slides and one for cotton swabs. Actually, for swabs, we have one at every lab table. Pipettes should be placed in the appropriate container. If plastic and they're not contaminated, they go in the trash can. If they're plastic and they're contaminated, they go in the biohazard container. If they are um, glass, they go in the glass pipette discard bin. We don't really have glass pipettes. Glass test tubes should be labeled, the labeling tape removed, and then placed upright in the test tube rack in the discard bin in the rear of the lab. Any questions about any of that? We don't really grow things in a liquid, not a liquid, but a container, like a, what do you call it, a little bottle or beaker. But if you would, you'd put that by the test tube rack. And it's glass. Never put the glass in the biohazard trash container, biohazard container. All right, supplies needed for the lab are in the front of the lab. Students would be assigned a drawer under the lab benches, and you'll have paper and pens and pencils in that drawer, and then a marker pen too. Remember where the book bags and your coat are stored. This area is considered outside of the lab, and you may bring things into that area and put them in the cabinet or the cubbyhole because it's considered outside the lab. Any question about any of that? All right. So you're required to follow these rules. Failure to do so may jeopardize the safety and safety of others. There won't really be um, a penalty because you won't be going in the lab, but you must learn these procedures for the quizzes. You will be quizzed on that material. All right, in the back of the schedule, I mean the back of the syllabus, we have the schedule. And here's the tentative score schedule for winter 2025. Sorry, I'll go in there and correct that. That should be a break there. And actually, this should be on a new page anyways. Oh, it seems to fit, so I'm going to leave it. Save that down. On the left side, leftmost column, we have the week and the dates, starting with Tuesday. And then Saturday is really the last day of the week for the class. And like most things are due on Saturday. And then there's a lecture topic in the next column. We'll talk about that in our lecture class. And then the laboratory columns, the rightmost column. Today we're going to talk about Lab 00, lab safety training. On Thursday, we'll talk about Lab 01, ubiquity of microorganisms. Both of these labs are due by 8 a.m. Friday, January 10th. So make sure you get them in by 8 a.m. Friday. On Friday, I will be taking roll from seeing who has turned in Lab 00 and Lab 01. And any student who's not turned in these labs will be dropped from the class. I have to go through this on Friday and then turn into the registrar's office who is not attending, and I will use the turning in of Lab 00 and Lab 01 on Friday to determine who's enrolled in the class and has not shown up. And you will be dropped if you do not turn those assignments in by 8 a.m. on Friday. Any question about that?
No.
All right. You have a few things due this week. You have to take the online plagiarism quiz by 11:59 p.m. Saturday, 1/11th. You must achieve 100% on the plagiarism quiz. You have two assignments that are due on Saturday, maybe only one assignment in the lecture. I'll talk about that in the lecture. And you should read the infectious disease project um, before next week, because we're going to talk about it next Tuesday, where you will begin the infectious disease project, and I'll talk about it in the lab. Any question about any of that? Well, let me show you where those are. The infectious disease project is in week 1 of the lab. Well, that's on. I think I have to move that. I'm talking about week 2. Sorry. It's in week 2 of the lab. This is week 1. So infectious disease project, I'll talk about it next week. It's a 100-point project. If you do not take the plagiarism quiz and get 100% on it, you won't get 100 points on your infectious disease project. You'll get a 0 points on it. So you must take the infectious disease, the plagiarism quiz um, to get 100 points on the infectious disease project. The plagiarism quiz, I'm giving you 20 points for taking it. I think it's about 20 questions. And to take the plagiarism quiz, you have to go through each of the steps, complete all of the items, read about the lockdown browser. There's a little movie for you to watch on Respondus lockdown browser. You do need, let's go actually go to that. You do need to watch that. It's not very long. It just tells you about lockdown browser, what to do if you cannot download lockdown browser and get it to work on your system. Um, I once had one student who, what she did was she deleted it and then re-downloaded it. Didn't work. She did this like 5 times and then sent me an email. I can't do anything to help you get Respondus Lockdown Browser to work on your system, you need to take the steps which are either in the video, because you can go contact Respondus Lockdown Browser and go through them, or you can go to the Tech Hub, Clark College Computer System, and they're very good at getting Lockdown Browser working on your system. Usually, the student has to change one or two settings on their computer to get the Lockdown Browser to work. And I'm not sure what the setting is, but Lockdown Browser will shut down your computer, so you can only use Respondus Lockdown Browser. It is a special web browser that you need to take the quizzes and all exams in this class. Any question about that? Meaning if you try to access the quiz or exam with another browser, you're going to get an error message because you can only access them with Respondus Lockdown Browser. There is a little movie about Respondus Monitor, and to tell you the truth, it's not even very applicable to me as an instructor. It's like it's more of interest to the college. Uh, but you can read a little bit about it, or not read about it, see a little movie on it, and the beginning's okay. But to tell you the truth, they talk about it in the Respondus Lockdown Browser. So this one you should watch. That one is optional. And then drop download instructions for downloading a Respondus Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor. Any question about any of that? Like I said, all exams will be using Respondus Lockdown Browser. Many of the quizzes and exams will be using Respondus Monitor. This will be using your camera or your webcam to monitor you while you're taking exams. And it'll be recorded, so you have to turn the, what do you call that? The camera on. Let me go take a look here and see how many of you have the camera on. Sorry, wrong place. Gotta shut down the share here just for a minute. Well, having trouble shutting down the share. There we go. Stop the share here. Ah, there's actually one student who has their camera on. Most students do not show. Why am I not seeing all the students? There we go. Three students are having their camera on. Hey, you don't have to have the camera on in the class, but for the exams, you must have your camera on, just to let you know. It will not allow you to take the exam unless Respondus Monitor can see your face at all times. And while you're taking a quiz or an exam, a Respondus Monitor must see your face at all times, meaning you cannot take a break. You cannot leave the monitor. If you do, you will, I think the exam will be shut down and you'll get a 0 on the exam. So once you start an exam, you should stay there. And that means you should probably use the restroom and get a little snack for you to eat or bring it with you by the computer, and then never leave the computer while you're taking a quiz or an exam. Any question about any of that?
I do have a question.
Huh?
Um, so I tried to download it and my current software on my current computer, it's outdated, so it won't allow me to download it. Does Clark rent laptops that I could use for days that we need to do quizzes and exams?
They do if they have one available. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
question is, how many students are renting them? But
Mm-hmm.
you tell them that you need one for taking the exams in the class,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll be put on a high priority. Most likely, um, they do have one available for students because this is early in the term. So go to, I don't know where you go, the Tech Hub immediately and request one. You can request it online too, which will be sending it in. You could probably do that in this lab. But
Okay.
they do have one, and they're probably available at the moment. When we were in lockdown with COVID-19, they were all used up. But I have a
Okay.
feeling now you can probably get one, especially early in the term.
All right, I'll see what I can do to get one for exams
Yeah.
and quizzes. I just wanted to make sure that I was able to access it because I
That would be the first thing to do. Another thing you could do once you put in your request for one, or you try
Mm-hmm.
to get one, is you could also see with the computer help desk if they can get it to run on your system.
Okay.
Okay. But you downloaded it and then the program itself told you that your
Yes,
computer
my
is too
my
old.
computer doesn't support it because it's like outdated. It's like a MacBook Air. It's 2017.
Oh,
I did
yeah.
email you about it,
No,
and
you don't
I
need to
tried
email me
literally
about that. I
everything.
do remember looking into that, and I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that both Respondus Lockdown Browser and Lockdown Monitor only work with the last two versions
Mm-hmm.
Windows, and I think they only work with the last two versions of Macintosh as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're older than that, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Not for me.
So tell them that you need it. And then if worse comes to worse, this is the worst case scenario. Clark College does have some computers. I don't know where they are. And you can go there. I think they're in the library, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, just go to
And it'll be
campus
like
and
a proctored exam. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And you can use Lockdown Browser on those computers. I'm not sure if they have Respondus Monitor, but um, I've set it up so if it's a proctored exam, meaning there's somebody there to watch you,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to use Respondus Monitor.
Okay.
Okay. But that would be the worst case scenario where you have to go into Clark College and take the exam. But hopefully you can actually rent a laptop.
Yeah, and if not, then I'll ask a few of my friends to borrow theirs for certain days that we have
Yeah,
free
because you
to
only
work
need it
them.
for the exams.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the only one that's set up that I absolutely require a Respondus Monitor is the final. The others are required, but I have ways which I haven't outlined yet. I'm not going to. There are ways of getting around it, and I'm just saying that for all the others, I have Respondus Monitor required. I have a backup in case somebody can't get Respondus Monitor to work.
Okay,
But for the final, you will have to go into Clark College to take it.
sounds good. Thank
All
you
right.
for answering my
Can I
question.
suggest real quick to
Sure.
Sure.
call the library and generally they'll help you out quicker because they don't have to go through a bunch of requests and they
Okay.
just
No,
let you know right away.
they don't rent out a laptop though. She's got to contact the something like the Tech Hub.
Oh, well, the library actually does loan out laptops,
Oh, really?
calculators.
For like a week or two?
No, for the term. You can use them for multiple
Cool.
terms. I had
I
to use
didn't
it
know
for
that. Okay.
2 terms and I bought my own. So just call them and generally you'll get a faster response.
Thank
Yeah,
you
You're
and
welcome.
put in that it has to be a modern one because you have this requirement for the
for
responders.
micro. Right.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you guys.
Sure. All right. Let's go back to where I was. I was talking about the responders monitor and lockdown browser. I think I was talking about the syllabus. All right. So I've got on here that the um, online plagiarism quiz is due Saturday, 1/11. But if you have trouble, don't worry about it. Um, I will give you an additional week to finish taking that. Obviously, you have to work on the problems, but if you find out that you're having trouble getting the system to work on your computer and there's no one available to help you because you started like Saturday and no one's available, or it's after 5 p.m. on Friday, so no one's available. Like I said, with the plagiarism quiz, although it's due on Saturday, I have it that you can do it up until I think next week, next Saturday. You can
Will you
take this
still get full
exam
points for
7
it?
times. Sorry?
If you turn it in after Saturday, will you still get full points for it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just assuming because I don't know how soon I'll get something to be able to use it.
All right. If they have it, you should be able to get it this week.
Okay.
Okay. And anyways, I'm not worried about the plagiary quiz. You can take it 7 times. You must get it 100% on it. I've never had a student who needed to take it more than 2 times. Okay. It's the same questions that I'll display, although the question may change their orders, meaning um, I think question 1 will still be in question 1's place, but what will be A, B, C, D, and E, the answers can change around. Any questions about that? So you must get 100% on this plagiarism quiz, but you can take it 7 times and it's the same questions.
I have a question about exams.
Do not wait until Saturday, second week, just let me misstate this, for the plagiarism quiz, because if you do not get 100% on this, you will get 0 on the infectious disease project. So do not wait on taking the plagiarism quiz. Any questions about that? Okay, what was your question again?
So are most exams and quizzes timed?
Yes.
So we have a time limit to finish it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, let me see. Now, to take the plagiarism quiz, you need to go through the lockdown browser requirement. You have to take the avoid plagiarism tutorial, and that will take you about an hour to finish. This is going to teach you how to avoid uh, doing plagiarism, what you need to do to stop yourself from plagiarizing someone. Like whenever you use 3 or more words from someone else, you're supposed to put that in quotes and then state where you got it from. If you do not, you are plagiarizing someone else. And let me state that this plagiarism tutorial was made by the library before AI became widely available, so it doesn't discuss citing AI. Let me remind you that if you use AI in this course, even if you rewrite it in your own words, you must cite where the information came from. Otherwise, you will be plagiarizing the AI and you will be penalized. Any questions about that? All right. Um, I think that's it for the syllabus and what we're going to be doing. Let's take a 5-minute break and then I will continue with lab exercise 00. Any questions? All right. Let's take a 5-minute break. I'll be back in, it's 3:28 by my clock. I'll be back in about 3:33. Okay, is everyone back? Maybe one person is not, but everyone else is. Let's begin. Are there any questions before I discuss the lab? So let me remind you, we're going to be discussing Lab 00, lab safety training today. You can get Lab 00 by scrolling down in our web page to the lab, module 00, lab safety training, and then the worksheet for the Lab 00 is there. All right, if you were to come into the lab and work in an unsafe manner in the lab, you can be banned from the lab. That won't happen because we're an online class. You'll be not working in the lab, but you do need to know this material as many of these rules are relevant to your careers. Uh, the objectives distinguish between safe and unsafe laboratory practices, understand where the relevant safety equipment is located in the lab. And in this lab, you just need to know what the relevant safety equipment is and understand how to safely dispose of contaminated materials. Microbiologists observe a number of safety rules as they're working with potentially pathogenic microorganisms. You won't be performing any of these activities in this lab because this lab will be online, but you are required to know how to create a safe laboratory environment. So one, you always wear a proper attire. This includes a clean lab coat that covers your lap when you're sitting, meaning it has to be buttoned up, disposable gloves, closed-toed shoes, and when you're working with a splash hazard, you wear goggles. So goggles are not worn all the time in the lab, only when there's a splash hazard. And then they must be removed before leaving the lab, and they will be kept in the lab. Obviously, the gloves will be thrown away, but the lab coat and the goggles will be reused. The goggles would actually be sterilized in between use. And then hands are washed before you come into the lab and before you leave. Long hair should be tied back as a safety precaution. Absolutely no food or drink in the lab or use of electronics. No personal items, unless you're wearing them, are allowed in the main part of the lab, including cell phones. All personal items are be stored in the personal storage area, meaning the cabinets, by the main lab door, and this area is considered outside of the lab. Any personal item that's brought into the lab, the main part of the lab, will be confiscated and not returned until they've been soaked in bleach for 15 minutes or passed in the autoclave, and that would destroy any electronics. Now, that doesn't include anything you're wearing, like your watch and your jewelry. The watch should be underneath your gloves, by the way. This picture is extremely important because it's showing you what a student normally looks like in the lab. There's the gloves. I don't know if those are goggles or personal eyeglasses. The hair is tied back. There's a lab coat on, closed-toed shoes, and you can see some other things that this lady is wearing, like pants and a blouse or a shirt. Okay, and this picture is the only part giving you that entire information. So you'll need to see this picture to answer some of the questions in this lab. Keep your work area clean. You got to clean it before you begin work, and then when you're all done, before you leave. And this is actually what a picture of our microbiology lab, what it would actually look like for you to come into the lab in microbiology at Clark. Discard waste appropriately. Regular trash, non-sharp objects like paper towels and gloves, if they're not contaminated, get put in the regular trash can. Contaminated test tubes go in the test tube um, discard bin. We don't have bottles, but if you were to put them, you put them by the test tubes. And soiled swab slides go in a container for either swabs or slides. And we have a container for cover slips too. We actually will reuse the slides. They will be sterilized, disinfected, washed, dried, and then put available for later use. The cover slips we do not reuse, and they will go in the cover slip discard bin, put in a little beaker or something with bleach in it, and then they'll be discarded with probably the broken glass. I don't know because I've never discarded it, but that would make my guess because they're not put in the regular trash. You never put regular glass in the trash can or in the biohazard container. I don't think I mentioned the biohazard container. Anything that is not a sharp, not glass, if it's contaminated and you're done with it, it goes in the biohazard container. That includes uh, petri dishes you're done with, petri dishes that, I don't know, you contaminate. Report all spills to your instructor immediately and then take care of them, solve them immediately. Cover them with a paper towel, blanch it with disinfectant, allow the disinfectant to soak for 15 minutes to kill the microbes, and then wipe it up with paper towels. Keep the reagent bottles covered when not in use. Don't pour hazardous chemicals down the drain. Put them in the, I don't know, hazardous container waste. No mouth pipetting. That hasn't been done since the 1960s or 70s, but we do mention it. Never place anything in your mouth while you're in the lab. We use back to incinerators, which you're not going to see the very tip of that. You put the this is called the loop in the back to incinerator and get it red hot. You can see the tip is getting red hot, and that will sterilize it, cool it, and then you can use the loop. We don't use Bunsen burners, but unless the electricity would go out, but we do have them available in the lab. You need to know about the safety equipment. We have a fire alarm in the lab, an eye wash station right there, fire extinguisher, a deluge shower if you're to contaminate yourself with some dangerous chemical, which I've never seen used in all my years in a microbiology lab or any other lab. First aid kit right there, fire alarm there, and right there, that's a fire blanket, which you can cover someone with. If they're ever on fire, you're going to put them under the deluge shower, I suppose, too. And you get something in your eye, you can go to the eye wash station. I've actually only had this used once. It was never in a teaching lab. It was actually in a research lab where a doctor spilled something in his eye, and I brought him to the eye wash station and told him to use it. The only time it's ever been used, hopefully it'll never be used while I'm teaching. Fire extinguisher, you need to know about it. Hopefully you'll never need to use it. Anyways, that's the lab safety equipment. You don't need to know where it is because we won't be in the lab, but you need to know what we have. You should always read the lab before doing the module, preferably before class, but if you do read it during class, that's okay because it's online. Here's the safety rules. I've already gone over it in the syllabus. So I'm not going to go over it again. Remember, we have area inside the room of the lab that we consider outside the lab, and that would be the door and the cabinet region. You just take a few steps into the lab, and that is what we consider inside the lab proper. No personal items, unless you're wearing them, are allowed into the lab proper. And if you do bring something into the lab proper that should not be there, I would confiscate it, and you won't get it back until it's been sterilized either in bleach or in the autoclave, which would destroy any electronics. All right, any questions about this lab? If not, let's go to the worksheet, and I'll briefly go through the worksheet. Lab worksheet 00, only turn in the worksheet to lab module 00. Here's the questions. Do not erase the asterisks. The asterisks tell you how many questions or how many answers to provide. So on rule 1, this question, you must give 4 different answers. Erasing them will only confuse yourself, so don't erase them, okay? I happen to know, so it won't confuse me. But you guys won't know, and then when you then later try to figure out how many answers to give, if you didn't give the right amount and I docked you, this will tell you what the correct answers are. In the lab, what do you always wear for safety before you enter the lab? This is not directly stated in the lab, but it is shown in the picture. Okay, somebody should silence your microphone, by the way. Uh,
Covered clothing?
yeah, clothing would be something that could be
Covered clothing, like covering your whole body.
shirts and pants, okay?
Yeah.
That's telling you answer. This would be something that you're going to probably put on in your home, okay? And then rule 2, after you enter the lab, what 2 items do you put on to keep yourself safe in the lab? Now, this is after you enter the lab. This is before you enter the lab. So obviously, these answers should not be these answers, and obviously these answers should not be in these answers. Just use a little common sense here, okay? And I always get students putting in the same 2 answers, and that's obviously wrong, okay? So answer rule 2 and rule 1, and this one you don't put on until after you come into the lab. And then rule 1, you have to put them on before you come into the lab, probably at your own home. This one you need to look up what a safety data sheet is online, and then tell me each chemical in the safety data sheet describes what. Provide at least a phrase for each answer, meaning a one-word answer is not acceptable. They should not be specific to one chemical, like let's say sodium chloride, and you say it can be irritating if spilled in the eye. Okay, it should be general for all chemicals in the lab safety data sheet. All right, rule 4, know the location of the safety equipment. Name 5 items of safety equipment found in the lab. We just discussed that. Okay, I'll tell you a fire extinguisher is one. Name 2 items that you can take into the lab. These are personal items that are worn by you. Do not put a lab coat because you only would possibly take the lab coat into the lab in the very first lab. If you buy the lab coat, you would never ever take it into the lab any other time. So don't put a lab coat. And then the third, can you eat and drink in the lab? That's a yes or a no. Question number 2, list 1 item of laboratory attire that you must wear in a microbiology lab. And then list 1 item that you are allowed to be brought in the microbiology lab. And that could be any lab class, not just the first lab class. So the lab coat should not be an answer because that would only be brought into the lab on the very first lab. So list an item that you're allowed to bring into the lab, any microbiology lab. And then 4, list 1 item belonging to you that is not allowed in the microbiology lab proper. So you could bring it in and put it in the cubby hole because that's considered outside the lab. All right. And then 5, remember to submit this file by 8 a.m. Friday of week 1 in the folder for worksheet for lab 00, or you will be dropped from the class. I'm going to use this and then the worksheet for lab 1 to take your attendance for week 1. And let me remind you that you are required to either attend the lab or view the lab lesson online. And geez, I hope I turned on the recording. Yes, I did. Great. All right. Any questions? If not, I'll be here until about 4:30 to help you answer any questions. You can use me if you wish. You don't have to. As soon as the last student logs out, I will log out as well. Any questions?
No, we have another lecture at 5.
The lecture starts at 5.
Okay. I'm good on questions.
All right. So
Bye.
let's get
See you
started on the
bye.
lab.
Okay.
All right.